as important as it is for us to maintain our habitat, to get the maximum number and health on deer, and to dictate their movement to increase our hunting opportunities, it's every bit as important to manage our whitetails. What we're going to talk about today is managing bucks. In order to pull that off, the very first step is to be able to age deer. Now, I don't care what people are telling you out there. It is not a science. You don't just look at a deer and say, oh, it's got a swayed back that's 6.5-year-old buck. I'll tell you what, I know deer that were 9.5 years old that never had a swayed back. What it is every bit as much art as it is science. You look for specific traits. On your younger deer, you're going to have a real skinny neck. Now, the neck is going to look skinny and long. The legs are going to look abnormally long. When you get to a 3.5-year-old deer, there starts to be a taper. Their chest is getting deep, but their gut tapers up a little bit. And their butt still isn't big. The neck now, it doesn't go all the way down to where it merges into the brisket, but it's getting closer. Your 2.5-year-old buck tends to be between the two. Now you get to 4.5 plus, I'll tell you right now, I'm very good at looking at nubbin bucks and saying, that's a nubbin buck. Whether it's on pictures or on the hoof, I'm going to be 99.9% correct on that. 1.5-year-old bucks, very good. I will look at that buck and I'll say that's a 1.5-year-old buck, and I will be, oh heck, 95, 98% accurate. 2.5-year-olds, you get down to the 85%. 3.5-year-olds, 70% accurate. 4.5 plus, I would say right around 60%. But if you show me a picture of a buck and you tell me that buck is either 6.5 or 7.5 years old, I'm gonna get it right 50% of the time because I only have two choices. Unless you have history with those animals, being able to look at that deer and say that's a 7.5-year-old buck, to be honest with you, I think for the most part it's baloney. History is where you get that. And what you do is you inventory your deer. The advantage we have as managers is that we have this ground year after year after year after year, so we can go ahead, we can get pictures of all these deer, we can index them, we can name our bucks, and then we can reference back to that the next year. So if we were pretty sure that was a 3.5-year-old deer last year, you know what? It's a pretty darn good bet it's 4.5 this year. Another thing that's important to consider in all this is the timing of the pictures you're looking at. Or if you're judging them out in the field, the timing of when that deer's coming through. Early season, you don't have those expanded necks. They're not all rutted up. Okay? So at that point, you can really pay attention to where does that neck go ahead and intersect with that brisket. You get to postseason, I'll tell you what, some of the scrawniest looking deer on your property is going to be those 4.5-year-olds and olders, because they work, if you get your age structure correct, they work so much harder at finding receptive does, tending receptive does, fighting, all that stuff. They put such a premium on breeding that what ends up happening is they don't eat anywhere near as much as that 3.5-year-old buck, who at the same time is not working as hard, he's eating more, he's not working as hard. He actually in late season tends to have a full body, where there's a swap. That 4.5-year-old plus buck, his midsection draws up as it comes back to the haunches because he's worked so hard. A mature buck will lose 25 to 30% body weight on average during the rut. That is a significant weight loss. Your immature buck, he doesn't lose anywhere near that much. So timing is an important key, and stacking all these different traits together, getting as many of them to tell you that that's a 3.5-year-old buck. The more that tell you he's 3.5 years old, the better your odds are that he actually is 3.5. Another thing that can help is finding sheds. The pedicles on those deer, they tend to get bigger with each year. Okay. You tend to have, when you find the sheds off of two different 4.5-year-old bucks, the racks themselves can be completely different. One can have all sorts of mass and short stubby tines. The other can be weak on mass but have all sorts of junk, real long tines. But the pedicle tends to be about the same size on both of them, which happens to be bigger than your 3.5-year-old bucks, which happens to be bigger than your 2.5, which happens to be bigger than your 1.5-year-old bucks. So between all of this data, none of it is 100%. Now, deer have different body traits just like humans do. But the more you can add up these traits, the more clues you have to say that's a 3.5-year-old buck, the more likely it is. So now you are able to create an index of the bucks you have out there and the age categories. From there, now we can start managing. Personally, on all the properties I manage, it's for age, and in some cases, age and antler characteristics. On the properties that I'm managing for 4.5, 5.5-year-old bucks, those at 3.5 years old, I'm trying to remove the lower stock. But one of the keys is you cannot judge antler potential on 2.5-year-old deer and younger, because so much of what that 1.5 and 2.5-year-old buck has on its head is dependent on when that buck was born as a fawn. If it was born late, it tends to have smaller antlers. If it was born perfect timing, it tends to have larger antlers up until you get to 3.5 years old. That's when they start to really catch up. Grown Big is brought to you by Wildlife Research Center, the gold standard. RECONYX, see what you've been missing. Antler King, bigger bucks, healthier deer. Heater Bodysuit, you stay warm or your money back. Food Plots for Deer, planning your habitat improvements and improving your hunting. Furminator, the best food plot implement on earth. Remington, America's oldest gun maker. Nomad, I hunt, therefore I am. At 3.5 years old, you can start managing for antler potential. Are you going to be right all the time? No, but you're going to be right most of the time. And that is the key. Play the odds. Play the odds. So as long as you consistently play the odds, in the long run, you win. You're going to be right far more often than not. It all starts with aging those deer accurately, though. You get that down, and everything else falls into place.